motivational interviewing. And so the state of Washington asked us to break this down into a series of 3 webinars. So this is the first of our 3 webinars that will conclude by the end of this year. And I'm sure we'll probably repeat this next year, but we'd like to welcome you. And I want to personally thank the ladies who helped me in the setup of the closed captioning today. Thank you very much. So Ken and I are both from Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. Ken, you can move it, you can advance. Today's webinar is hosted by DBHR through the Healthcare Authority. This is an interactive training, and we encourage you to ask questions and interact throughout the session. The slides, as well as a link to the recording of the webinar, will be available following the presentation. They'll be emailed to you from the Washington State Healthcare Authority, not from Rutgers. Next slide, please. So just to go through a few basics. Upon entry into the webinar, just the way the webinar defaults, you were all muted and cameras are off. I did go through the chat to make sure everybody could type. Because that's another fun thing that Zoom now does in webinars is it defaults to silencing all of you so you can't communicate with us. So I have fixed that. So to ask a question, simply type your question in the chat, or if you would rather us call on you, let us know that in the chat, and we would be happy to call on you and open your mic. We love that stuff. We love to hear from you because we get really bored listening to ourselves every day. Ken is probably really bored listening to me. I'm not bored listening to him, but you know. So the one thing that I realized we didn't have in our slide deck was a bio of Ken. And you don't need my bio. He's the center of the stage today. So hi, Lawrence. I hope you're enjoying the snow. We don't have any in the Northeast and haven't had any yet this year. So you guys can keep it. We're good with that. We're good with that. We're good with our balmy winter. But I will let Ken introduce himself and give you a little bit about his background, and then we will get into our objectives. So Ken?
Will do. So I'm going to say this real carefully. Good morning, everybody, because it's afternoon here and I struggle with that. But anyway, good morning to all of you. Hope you have your coffee and your bagel and your schmear and you're all ready to go. Some of you may have attended one of these before. I've been doing one of these pretty much every year for you guys. But there's still a nice turnout. So that either means you really like me or you guys have a really high turnover. Or I'm willing to entertain a little bit of both maybe. So anyway, regarding my background, just to save you the bio slide, I've been in the field for about 33 years. And the first half of that was working in psychiatric emergency, doing emergency psychiatric evaluations to determine if people needed to be hospitalized or not. And the second half has been working from the university side. The project that Dawn and I work for, we do consultation work in New Jersey state psychiatric hospitals. So we are based out of those hospitals, and the goal is to improve the quality of care there and also to improve working conditions there. We also do a bunch of other things for the university as evidenced by this, and a bunch of other tasks as well. And I also have a private practice here in New Jersey. So as far as how I got involved with stages of change, that was one of my first things with the university. They didn't teach this in school when I went to school. Hopefully a lot of you are younger than me and you've had some contact with this before. I'm hoping this is more of a review than a first time thing, but if it's a first time thing, better late than never. It took me about 17 years before I learned about it. And what happened in my case was I noticed that I was stuck with a lot of my clients and that I felt very frustrated because I couldn't help move them forward. And I got the distinct feeling that we were in this sort of the opposite of a tug of war. We were each pushing on each other. I was trying to push them in the direction of change, and consequently, they were pushing back. And I was thinking, well, this isn't good. I feel like I've, created some resistance here, that I felt like I was working against myself. So that's a big reason why stage of change and motivational interviewing, which we're going to be doing the next 2 Thursdays, have been very helpful to me. If you feel like you're stuck, if you feel like you're trying to push people where they don't want to go, if you feel all this pressure to say the perfect thing, do the perfect thing, or to fix people, you're probably in the right place. And this presents a chance for us to address this. And I look forward to you being able to try the things that we talk about out with your clients and maybe also in your personal life as well. Okay, so as far as the objectives for today, we're going to talk about each stage of change, how people move between change stages, the strategies for each, specific interventions for each, and then we're also going to provide some additional resources for you, and then this will lead into motivational interviewing in the next 2 weeks. So first off, I want you to think about how change has been in your own life. I'm sure that you have gone through some rather significant changes in your own existence, and I'm guessing that those changes weren't neat and easy. Usually someone doesn't wake up one day and say, okay, I'm changing this thing today, and that's it. Usually there's years of work or at least thought that go into that, maybe a couple previous attempts, so it's basically a messy cyclical process. The term 1 step forward and 2 steps back definitely applies here. And where we get stuck as mental health professionals and as clinicians is we are what I affectionately refer to as cheerleaders for change. So we're trying to move that person forward. We're trying to get them to be where they can be, where we want them to be. And then that puts them in the position of putting the brakes on. If they're scared, if they don't see it, if they don't trust you completely, if they don't trust themselves completely, they put on the brakes. And then we are trying to push them over the finish line, which is very difficult. Another problem that we have is all of the good stuff that we learned in school is designed for people that are ready to change. And most people that we're working with are not ready to change. Only very few people are ready to change, and they're only ready to change what they're ready to change, not necessarily what we want them to. So that becomes a challenge. So the stat that we got here was only 8 to 12% of people are actually ready at any given point in time. But we assume that everyone is ready when they come in the door. And I'm sure we're also getting a lot of pressure from our employers to develop that change and to document that change as well. And of course, anything we don't do right, we will likely do again. So again, hopefully you've seen this before. If not, welcome to it. This is not Trivial Pursuits. This is the original graphic from Stages of Change, which was actually given out by the creators of it. So if you see this little pie slice type thing, we're going to work our way around basically from the 12 o'clock position from pre-contemplation around to maintenance, 1 step at a time. And we're also going to talk about relapse and all that other good stuff as well. And as you can see, this isn't new. It's taught a lot more often in school now than it was when I went through, but if you heard it in school before and you heard it when you didn't need it, then it may not be so helpful. Or maybe you just needed to hear it again. I know I need to hear things more than once in order for them to stick. So starting out, the first stage that we talk about is pre-contemplation, which has also been affectionately referred to as anti-contemplation. So pre-contemplation is that stage where you don't have a problem, basically summarizes it in a word. The person doesn't believe that they have a problem, and they usually have what I call a cover story. So where what we see in the state psychiatric hospitals is, I really don't have a mental illness. The police in my town hate me, so they keep sending me here. Or they say, well, I'm homeless, and that's why I'm here. There's always another story. It can also be that stage where, I don't know about you, but when you first start feeling sick, you kind of pretend you don't, and you hope it goes away. Like you kind of know at some level that you're getting sick, but you're like, I got too much to do. And maybe if I just bear down on this, then I'll forget about it and it'll pass. So pre-contemplation captures both those spheres, the deliberate, I don't want to hear about it, and the sort of pre-awareness. And what happens is people stay in that pre-contemplation stage for a while, and then either internally or externally, they get moved into contemplation. And contemplation is best captured by the saying, I have a problem, but I don't know what to do about it. In fact, very often we call contemplation the but stage. And that's 1 T in but, by the way. And the idea is that very often you can hear what we're going to talk about later as change talk and sustain talk, the arguments for change and the arguments against change. you'll hear them in the same sentence. I really want to quit smoking, but I have a stressful job. I'd like to eat better, but healthy food is expensive. So you hear but's the pivot point. So they're making both arguments for and against change in the same sentence. That's a really good tip that someone's in the contemplation stage. So they're thinking about it. They're not in what we would have called in the past denial or anything like that. The question is now they're not ready to do anything about it because they're still caught in that ambivalent stage. Very often they talk about this as sort of a scale. You got the reasons for change on one side and you got the reason against change on the other side. And then next up is preparation. So preparation is when, okay, I know I have a problem. I got a pretty good idea what it is. And now I'm making a plan to do something about it. Because what happens is changes that are made impulsively tend not to last. If you say you're going to eat healthier, but you still have a fridge full of junk food, you've kind of set something up against you. If you've decided to make a change in your life and you haven't told any of the people around you about it, then you've kind of set yourself up for failure. So these quick impulsive changes, although you may have a head full of steam right at the beginning, they tend not to last. And again, change very often is not a sprint, it's a marathon. We want the change to actually stick. So that means we need to do a lot more in the planning stage before we actually take action instead of, what did they call it? Ready, fire, aim sort of thing. So this is the actual plan making stage. This is actually the stage that we are worst at as helpers, as people who work in this field. Usually the scenario is the client is ambivalent. Part of them wants to change, part of them doesn't want to change. We, of course, want them to change. So as soon as they give us that little glimmer of sunlight that they're ready to move and ready to do something, we go. My favorite example of this is actually with a family. Their adult son had severe mental illness and also addictions. And it was always, I'm not going to get help. I'm not going to get help. I'm not going to take meds. I'm not going to go see a therapist. None of the above. So finally, one day he says, okay, tomorrow's the day I'll go to rehab. So of course the parents make all the arrangements, pack the car, get the insurance cleared. They get everything done. They're all ready to go. The car's set. It's in the driveway. You already know how this story goes. The next morning, he says no. And you go through that loop a couple times with someone, and then you start to get angry and resentful. And you say, you know what, this person doesn't want to get help. And then you withhold to sort of protect yourself. Well, none of that's necessary. What happened is the parents and we get out in front of the client. If we don't get out in front of the client to begin with, we don't have to go through that loop a bunch of times. When I was in school, they talked about the yeah buts. I don't know if that's still a thing, where if you just sit and make suggestions to a client about what they could do differently, they'll go, yeah, but, whether they've tried it or not. And that means we're out.
That sounds like me. Yeah, I can start that, but
I tried it already and it didn't work, or I didn't really try it, or that wouldn't work because. So the yeah buts, the attack of the yeah buts. So this is the one we sleep on. So we'll talk about this in a little more detail, but this is one I want you to pay special attention to because it's probably the one we do the worst.
Can I interject here, Ken? And it's just, I guess maybe this is more of a question for you to address later. Do you think some of that is fear? Do you think that the buts are fear talking?
I think both sides are fear talking.
Okay. All right. Well,
I think us coming up with a bunch of suggestions makes us feel better and makes us feel competent. Yay, I have all the answers. Yay. Yeah. I labored for years under the delusion that I could say or do the perfect thing that would cause a spontaneous cure. I had the power to cure bipolar disorder or schizophrenia just by saying or doing the right thing. And I labored under that delusion for a few years. And the real bad side of that was the pressure that I put on myself. And now I feel like, okay, I have to say something. I have to do something. I have to be smart. And I failed a lot.
I just wanted to touch on one thing that Elion, and if I pronounced your first name incorrectly, please correct me. I appreciate it. They said that their therapist has been really going the DBT route of yes and instead of the yes but, and it's been interesting. And I've had that utilized with me as well. And it is a very interesting switch to make. So thank you.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. So yeah, I think there's fear on both sides. There's fear. I admit fear on my side. I want to help. I want to have the answer. And as we'll talk about motivational interviewing next week. It's okay not to have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. It's just, that's a given. And then I think it's also a fear from the client side too, because they fear failure. They absolutely fear failure if they've tried before. I mean, Dawn and I work with people who don't want to be discharged from a state psychiatric hospital. And I'm going to say not the best psychiatric hospital in the world, but they don't want to be released because they've gone out before and they've failed, and they don't want to go through all of the external and internal stuff that happens, going around that loop again. So they're afraid they're going to fail. They're also, to some degree, afraid that they're going to succeed. And that's a whole other topic which we could get into. Sometimes success is a whole lot scarier than failure, especially if you have some negative beliefs about yourself. So that's a whole other chapter on that. In fact, I think we have some videos about that, but not here and now. So just to recap the stages that we've talked about before, and I'll use the example of my friend. My friend Tom, he and I have never been underweight ever. And we were probably in both a little bit of denial that we weren't actually in such great shape. And we chose to ignore that for a long time. And my friend Tom's story was that his blood work was good. So as long as his blood work was good, he was in good health, regardless of, the scale or other things like that. So you might describe that as pre-contemplation. He has another story going. He doesn't have a problem. He's got a cover story for what's going on. Well, then all of a sudden, he goes to see his doctor, and his doctor puts him on medication for diabetes and high blood pressure. So he just got kicked into contemplation. So now he has a problem, but he doesn't know what to do about it. He doesn't want to take the medication. He doesn't want to get sicker, and he doesn't know what to do. So he's completely stuck. And then he started to move into, eventually he moved from contemplation into preparation where, okay, this is what I'm going to do to take care of myself. And he made a few false starts. My favorite false start of his was he went to Dick's Sporting Goods and basically filled the trunk of his car with all this great athletic equipment that he was going to use. And he proceeded to have basically Dick's Sporting Goods in the trunk of his car for like the next year. And it all just stayed in the package and it all just sat right there. And I think we've all done that before, where we've taken the step to make a change, but then just not followed it with anything. I remember joining a gym once. That's the end of the story. I joined the gym and I never went back. But, again, that's sort of
exactly what I just typed into chat, Ken. I had a gym membership once. As a matter of fact, I think I'm still paying for it.
It's a hassle because, I mean, you go and you pay, and then next thing you know, they're nagging you about coming back and keeping paying. And it was a real hassle. I definitely didn't enjoy it. And it was one of my numerous false starts in taking better care of myself, which has been the big change effort in my life, is my own self-care. So pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation. Now we move into action. This is day one. This is when we put the plan into practice. And this is the hard part. You're capable of making any excuse known to man or woman or anybody else that you shouldn't do this thing. Like, oh, this was the bad day. I love the joke from the Airplane movie, where I picked a bad week to stop drinking. I picked a bad week to stop sniffing glue. Like, it's a line you can use for anything. As soon as you have a stressful day, you're like, you know what? This was the wrong day to do this. So this is the hard part, where the change is really a chore. In fact, as we'll talk about later, one of the major parts of this stage is dealing with the stress of the change, of doing without what you're doing without, and, now having this new thing. This might be those first couple of weeks in the gym. We're coming up on New Year's when everyone goes to the gym again for like a week. Those that actually make it into the gym, unlike me. And they just, they don't keep it going for that long because they haven't made all the contingency plans or enlisted all their supports yet. So I'm working on it, and it's difficult. Now, at the book says the 6-month mark. I'm not so thrilled with that time estimate. At a certain point, when you've implemented a change, it gets easier, where now it's not a hassle to do it anymore. In fact, in a weird way, you might actually look forward to it, or you start to see the benefits of it, and it just eases up for you a little bit. The example that I always use in our in-person trainings, and feel free to type in the chat about this, and I'm thinking about, for those of you out there who've quit smoking and quit smoking for years, was there a period of time after which it got easier? And again, the book says 6 months. I'm not a huge fan. I've seen people who say, it doesn't get easier for years. It doesn't get easier ever. And then I've seen other people who say, no, it's a couple of weeks or a couple of months. Once you get on a good roll, you're on a good roll. If you're that recovered smoker, or, if there's something else that you're comfortable sharing about in the chat, please do. Was there a period of time where you noticed it wasn't quite the chore that it was when you started out? And that's what the maintenance stage is. It's getting easier to do. You've now sort of incorporated this change as part of your routine. And of course, no journey through change would be complete without what they used to call relapse. That had some negative connotations to it and some misunderstandings with other types of relapses. They also referred to it as recycling, because you just, you cycle through, and this is a natural part of it. This is when you kind of backslide from one stage into the other. So you go from, we'll talk a little bit more about how this looks in a minute, but usually it's somebody who's just on the precipice of action, or just started and then something happened and they backed off. Okay, so my funny story about this one is my dad tried to quit smoking. Well, this is more of an action stage story. My dad tried to quit smoking years ago. He eventually did. And this one day I was young and cute. I think I was still in grade school, and he was trying to quit. And he had said right before he left the house that day that today was the day he was going to quit smoking. So I decided I was going to help my dad. So I went through the entire house and I found every pack of cigarette and every cigarette that he had in the house. My dad was one of these guys that had a partial pack everywhere, like in every jacket and dresser drawer and desk. But I knew where all the spots were. So I went and got all of them because I'm going to help my dad. He comes home from work and he's had a terrible day and all he wants to do is come home and have a cigarette. And we lived way out in the sticks, so there isn't like a store nearby or anything. So he goes in the dresser, nothing there. Desk, nothing there. Goes through the whole house, nothing there. So finally he decides he's got to get in the car and drive a ways to go to the store to get cigarettes. Yes, it was apparently that bad of a day. And just before he leaves, he decides to go to the bathroom. He lifts up the toilet seat and there are all the cigarettes swirling in the bowl where I'd put them, completely waterlogged. I don't remember the next couple of days of my life. I just remember white light and angels and hearing harps and talking to deceased relatives and things like that. But after that, he eventually did quit smoking, but that's a whole other story about how that worked. So, but he had several relapses along the way, and relapses, as we'll talk about more later, are really learning how to make the change stick. It's changes to the plan. We make the blueprint for change in preparation, but here's where it gets tested and here's where we change it so that it matches real life. So a couple important things to remember about stages of change. These things are constantly in motion. At one of our hospitals, we assess people for their stage of change when they first came in the hospital, and then that form stayed in their chart for the entire time they were in the hospital. So the stages of change assessment that they did, which was really good, became years old at some point. And you can change what stage you're in multiple times during a day. If we push someone forward, if we move them beyond where they're comfortable going, they'll dig their heels in. If you were walking down the hall and I come up behind you and I put my hands on you and I push you in the direction that you were already going faster, first of all, you're going to freak out a little bit because that's really inappropriate. But two, even though I'm sending you in the direction you want to go, this isn't how you want to get there. This isn't good. So you're going to rightfully resist that effort. Sometimes that can actually be used as a tool in your favor. If you say, oh, I don't think you're ready. I don't think, as we get into paradoxical interventions, for those of you who are fans of those, I don't know if you're ready for this yet. I'm not sure. I don't want to ask you to do too much. Sometimes, and I'd be interested in your opinion, those of you who work with people with addictions quite a bit, sometimes that works. Sometimes telling someone they can't is far more of a motivator than they can. And another really critical point is that people are in different stages for different issues. I really want to reinforce this point. For example, in the hospitals, and probably where you work too, there are a lot of people who have, I don't know, even know what they're calling it in different parts of the country. It used to be called co-occurring disorders. I hate that. It was MICA before that. But they have issues of mental illness and addictions, or dependencies, depending on how you want to call it. It's not a foregone conclusion that a person is going to feel like they're in the same stage for each of those. We have many people who are okay with the idea that they have an addiction. And they may be in preparation. They may even be in action, but they may be in pre-contemplation about mental illness. Maybe the stigma of mental illness is too strong, or they resent the idea of being crazy or anything like that. So on this one area, they're ready to move. On this other area, they're not. They're at a much different area. And if we conflate the two, no, you have bipolar disorder and you have, multiple addictions. That's not going to work for us. We're losing the part where they're motivated to change by connecting it to a part where they're not. And I'll break that down a little bit more later. But just to know that for each thing, people are in a different place and they're all moving targets. In fact, I'm going to pause right here because I'm watching the chat, but I'm trying to pay attention to what I'm doing. If there's anybody who wanted to ask a question about those stages and just the stuff that we've covered so far, I just wanted to take a minute and give people an opportunity to do that. And we'll do one or two more of these breaks as we go. So right now's a minute. If you have a question, if you want to speak up, fire away.
I just want to kind of read to you one of the things that Alexandra just said that I think is pretty amazing. And I love the approach. They said, I'm a substance use disorder professional and work with adults and youth. When I first meet with them, I tell them, I'm not here to tell you not to use. You already have people telling you that. For me, just saying that has provided change talk.
That is a fantastic MI-friendly intervention. Don't make the same mistake that everyone else has already made. I mean, that's great. I always joke and say that don't say something to the client that they've already heard from someone taller than you, shorter than you, smarter than you, not as smart as you. If they've already heard it, just because it's coming from you doesn't make it work.
And Madison has a question. We have a couple questions, so I'll get to both of them. Is it helpful to verbalize with people what stage of change you may perceive them to be in? So like to have a conversation around somebody being in pre-contemplation stage and what that means for them.
Pre-contemplation stage might be the exception to that. We'll talk about it as we go through the strategies. I do like talking about this with them. In fact, at the end, I'm going to go on a long rant about the Changing for Good book. It's a really nice paperback book that it's kind of a self-help guide through the stages. So you can assess your own stage of change. Like say you have something that you're thinking about changing and you're not sure what stage you're in. This will not only tell you what stage you're in, it'll tell you where in that stage you are, and it'll tell you what the next task is so that you can move forward. So yeah, I think it's a great thing to discuss. This whole thing about change is a continuum, because how we talk about change is very frustrating. You can hear a lot of self-defeating talk in how we talk about change. So I'll go back to my own example about my weight. So if I say to myself, I need to lose 30 pounds. Okay, that's a daunting task, right? Have I ever done that before? No. So, okay, that's pretty challenging. Here's the next part. If I lose 30 pounds and then gain 30 pounds back again, did I win? No. I just did the elevator weight thing. So what I really want to do is move progressively toward a healthier weight. And that happens 1 pound at a time, right? So I've set myself up for failure just in the way that I've talked about change. It's far easier to lose a pound and keep it off, hopefully, than it is to just drop 30. And of course, it's more in line with where my goal is anyway. The other way that we defeat ourselves through our change talk is if someone's going to quit smoking, as soon as they pick up a cigarette, they go, okay, that's it. It's over. I'm off the wagon now. No. The old, we'll talk about this, but a slip is not a fall. A lapse is not a relapse. That just having that one-time thing might be helpful for you. It might be something that can actually help you make your recovery stronger. But if you just say, okay, the heck with it, let's just go all in. Now we've thrown out the whole plan. So I think it is good to talk about this. Talking about how change happens helps address some of the change myths that people bring in. Oh, I had a cigarette, so I failed, or I've set these goals that are either unrealistic or not really what I want. So that's a
We-
really good.
We have another question, couple more. One from Kilminda. Can you explain pushing back causing movement one more time? So
Okay.
that's somebody they can't.
Okay, so just to give an example, I was working with someone who had multiple addictions. And one of them was a sex addiction. And the sex addiction was the thing that was getting him in legal trouble. So I don't know how to say this nicely, but a lot of people, I'm a person in recovery. I'm a recovering, I call myself a recovering addict. And a lot of us, if you tell us we can't do something, we get highly motivated. And if you tell us we can do something, we don't believe it. We don't take it in right away. And I think this is true for anybody who harbors some pretty negative core self-beliefs. So I'm working with this gentleman, and so he's got the sex addiction. He's also got a bunch of other ones going on. So it's like, you know what? I don't want to take on everything. I think taking on everything is too much. To ask you to become abstinent from this, that, the other, and all of this stuff at once, it's just too much. If kind of a harm reduction thing. If sex addiction is the thing that's going to get you locked up and removed from your family and all this other kind of stuff, let's address that first. We're going to get to the other stuff, but just not now. It's too much. Turns out that was actually the best pep talk I ever could have given him. So he made a go of it by stopping everything, except, interestingly enough, picked up cigarettes, by the way. So it's like there had to be something there, but he stopped everything all at once and made it work for a couple of years, with the exception of cigarettes. So pushing ahead sometimes has that person push back. Sometimes if you don't put that pressure on them, sometimes they'll rise to the occasion themselves. Sometimes our pressure actually prevents change, is probably the side comment to that.
Okay, we have another more statement from Lawrence. Could you please talk about how to use MI in developing an initial treatment plan, a plan consistent with the stage of change I'm assuming that the person is in? So I guess we'll probably get to that a little bit later.
Yeah, we'll get into it a little later. We'll definitely get into that more in the next 2 weeks. So I hope you're on for the whole tour of the next two when we really get into motivational interviewing. The next week's session is going to be about, unless I have time for it today, which I probably won't, where stages of change and motivational interviewing interface. That's going to be right where you are in terms of the treatment plan, I think.
Okay. We also have a question about the name of the book, and that was Changing for Good, Linda.
It's
and I think is that Carnes or is that somebody else, Ken?
No, it's going to be in the it's in the references.
Okay, so it will be there.
And I actually have it behind me, but I'm got to track it down.
Also have a question about how to address phone addiction. So I'm guessing we'll talk a little bit about more of maybe electronic or other dependencies. We could probably work that into the next couple of webinars.
You all are awesome, because you're reminding me of all the things that I mean to say and didn't say. And on my YouTube channel, which if you put my name in, it comes up, but also the channel that we're going to show you at the end, the Rutgers site, we have a whole series of videos, and one of them is specifically on process addictions, or I believe you call it process dependencies. We have a whole thing around that. So we're not going to go into that one very specifically, sort of apart from just referring to people with addictions, but that's where that is. The other thing I would say is there's a book called Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps. It's Patrick Carnes, Carnes. He does a lot of work about non-addiction specific recovery. So whatever you're addicted to, and it covers people who go from one addiction to another to another. That's in all the addiction stuff on the videos on our website as well. So we'll touch on that when we get to the references as well. Really good questions.
Looking good. Okay, Ken. We're good.
Okay. All right. So let me see where are we at here. So now we move into the strategies part. Now, as we mentioned before, pre-contemplation is that it's both pre-awareness and it's also anti-contemplation, which is I don't want to hear about it. My favorite example of pre-contemplation is when I used to work on an inpatient unit. We had a smoking cessation group there, and I would ask this woman if she wanted to go to the smoking cessation group, and she would give me the finger. And she would do this every day when I asked her this question, which, because I'm an astute clinician, that told me that she did not, in fact, want to come to the group. And similar to one of the questions that was, one of the statements that was made earlier, how I stopped getting the finger was by approaching her and saying, look, if you come to the group, that doesn't mean you have to quit smoking. It's just information. That's all it is. She didn't come to the group, but she stopped flipping me off. So I took that to be progress. So the deal with pre-contemplation, it's different from the other stages. There are really two main tasks here. For me, the first task is to listen and find out what the cover story is. What's their interpretation of the problem? Problem definition is so critical in the process of change. Until you know what it is, it's very difficult to change. So what's the cover story? And the cover story may be psychotically based, and that's okay. It may be, just some ego defense, and that's okay. Whatever they say it is, it's okay. We're not agreeing with it. We're just hanging around long enough to hear what it is, paying them the respect to hear what their story is, whether or not we agree with it, which is part of relationship building. And also looking for weak spots, looking for where the places are that we may, eventually, kind of go. So for example, we have a gentleman who's in our hospital now. He believes he's a member of the English royal family, and he knows more about the English royal family than anyone I've ever met. And so he tells me this whole 45-minute story about how he's one of the rightful heirs to the throne, but they've put him in this psychiatric hospital, blah, 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 blah. So we hear the story for about 45 minutes. And at the end of it, I said, I have one question for you. I said, I appreciate all the information. I appreciate you sharing the story with me. I just have one question for you. Why do you have a Bronx accent? Knowing that he would have a story for that. Like there's an answer for that. He's already thought of that. But we got off to the best start, despite not making any progress on that. Had a relationship with this gentleman the entire time he was in the hospital, just because I took the time to hear him out, as opposed to saying, oh, well, no, that's psychotic. You're not a member of the English royal family. If I just shot that down right at the beginning, we would have had nothing. So we kind of established that. So part one is hear them out, get the cover story. And then that's kind of doing your research for later on. And then the other piece may be limit setting, because at this point, this person doesn't realize that they have a role in this. They don't feel that they have a problem. And they have the right to continue doing what they're doing until they realize it isn't working for them anymore. And they have the right to the consequences that come along with it, whether it's admissions, arrest, or whatever it is. They have the right to stay like that. And, I know it's our job to, lead people in the direction of change. But at a certain point, it's just limit setting where, look, okay, you don't have to own that you have this problem that other people say you have, but here's what we can and cannot abide by where we are now. Or just letting them know what your side of things are. This is what I'm going to do, and this is what I have to do. This is my role in this. So again, you're having that very clear communication. And of course, you're always trying to leave that door open so that they can come to it. So when they get tired of the negative results that they're getting, and they are tempted to look another way. This was my favorite part about crisis, is being in an emergency room is a great place for a person to realize that their plan isn't working. My favorite saying is, if you're in a place with a drain in the floor, your plan probably isn't going that well. And so that's very often when people kind of have that moment and they're ready to move on to the next step. So in the case of contemplation, we've got the scales going on here. And here we want to help the client. Let's make the list. What are all the reasons to make this change? What are all the reasons to not make this change? And let's try to be as impartial as possible. They already know what side we're on. We already have our job title. They already know. So let's look at both sides. And this is where our role as information provider can come in. We can provide all the information about, the good and the bad parts of change. I'm a big fan of the pro and con list. Motivational interviewing has one that's particularly good that we'll be discussing in the next 2 weeks. Smart Recovery, if you're familiar with that, also has a really nice one in their toolbox, so that you can help people. And for me, I have to write it down. I have to list it out and I have to see it. Here are all the reasons for change. Here are all the reasons to stay the same. And which of those carry the most weight? So I like having people make a list and then either circle them or in some way prioritize the ones that are highest. You might have a person that has only one reason to stay the same, but that reason might be more important than all the reasons to change. And that's important to know. So as far as the preparation stage, let's make the written plan. And again, Smart Recovery has a nice version of this. There are other nice ones out there. This is probably where you're getting into treatment planning. You know, we're preparing to change. What are the things that are going to help us change? What are the things that may hinder us from changing? You know, how would this plan fail? I love asking that, working in emergency. If this plan were going to fail, how would it fail? The client knows. They know already. And even if this means when the person says they want to change, maybe push it back a little bit. One of those examples of not pushing forward, but holding back on the change process is, let's not start the change today. Let's start when we're ready. Let's make the plan. Let's make the contingency. Let's get all our ducks in a row. You know, let's get all the proverbial alcohol out of the house, or literal alcohol out of the house. Let's get everything ready. And then we'll do this thing. You know, you got to weed before you can plant. There's some work to do before you actually get to the change process itself. And then action stage, we were just saying, don't start till you're ready. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So it's not about starting today or starting tomorrow. It's about making it stick. You know, it's eventually going to become a lifelong, you know, process of change. And then the maintenance stage. And this one, when it starts to get easier, you start looking at, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing to change? Another example of something in the maintenance stage is the 12th step, which is where you help someone else with the same thing. That also keeps you in touch with how it was for you when you were starting out. So there's a benefit to that as well. And very often, I would say, you know, working with people with mental illness and people with addictions, self-care is critical. It's absolutely critical. I mean, you see the statistics on how young people with mental illness and addictions are dying these days. And I think that's actually getting younger with fentanyl out there. So the part about self-care, what's the next part of your life that needs to change? I find it very overwhelming cleaning my whole house. So I do one room. I get one room right. And then after that one room's right, I'll get to the next one. I can't just take on the whole thing at once. I'll procrastinate it and then go binge watch something. That's my speed. So relapse stage, one of the critical parts of relapse/recycling stage is when people are in this stage, they're ashamed and they're angry. And we don't want to feed that. We don't want to kick somebody when they're down. So one of my favorite strategies to do is to ask, one of the reasons I like doing the plan, the written plan, is so that we can blame the plan when things don't work out. So if we make a relapse prevention plan, I worked with this one gentleman in the hospital. He would have arguments with his family. They would call the police and he would end up getting rehospitalized. So we made a plan that the next time he was going to get in an argument with his family, he was going to go outside and take a walk. We ended up back in the hospital again. And I said, what happened? He said, well, you know, started to have a fight with my mom. And I said, and he said, and it was raining outside. And now, instead of blaming him or even blaming me, I said, let's blame the plan. I'm thinking to myself, that was a terrible plan. What sort of plan doesn't have a weather contingency in it? All right, so let's work on that. So, all right, you're going to walk out. And if the weather isn't nice, you're going to sit in your room and put your music on. And you're just going to chill out and relax. So we started to develop the treatment plan. We blamed the plan, but instead of throwing it out, we built on it. So that way it's a continual process forward and change instead of, you know, stop and start over again, as we'll talk about in a little bit. Blame the plan. I'm a big fan of that. So twice now we talked about this movement through the stages. So you see here, instead of having it the way we had it before, it's kind of left to right from pre-contemplation to maintenance. Relapse is any movement from right to left, backwards through the stages. But what you see here are two of the most common scenarios for relapse, and that is someone's in the action stage or just about to start the action stage, and they fall back. Now, very often what they do is they fall back into contemplation. So if you think of someone who has been on numerous medications or been on numerous diets, they just feel like they're on this like hamster wheel where they just go around and around and around and around. Here we go again. You know, we try this is going to help. It ends up not helping. You know what? Nothing helps. That's where people go. So in working with their stages, what we try to do is redirect back to preparation. So instead of saying, okay, that didn't work, let's start over again, we say, well, what parts of it worked? What did we learn? You know, when you had that relapse, the symptoms, what happened? Was it stress? Was it a particular people, place, or thing? Was there a certain circumstance? What was the thing? And then how can we plan for that thing? How do we plan for the rain outside so that I don't have this guy walking in the rain to keep him from having a fight with his family, you know, or the snow for that matter. So you see the two arrows leading back into relapse, the one that goes all the way back to contemplation. If we can address that and just sort of say, hey, let's build on the plan. Let's make the plan better. Now they're still in that process again, instead of feeling defeated and feeling like you have to start all over again. And this is where relapses can actually be a good thing. They can actually make your recovery stronger. Now, obviously, you got to survive a relapse. That's game one. But if you get to the point where every time there's a relapse, you learn something from that, you can adapt from that and grow from that, the odds, I think, get a lot better for you going forward.
Ken, Sarah Lynn has a question.
Mhm.
Have there been instances where somebody relapses back to pre-contemplation?
Yeah, that's rare, but it does happen. I haven't seen very much of that, but it does happen, where I think a person can just feel so defeated that they're like, you know what, I don't even have a problem. This is just, you know, think about how many people, well, I don't know if you get this, but we get this in New Jersey. People are so frustrated with the New Jersey mental health system that they say, you know what, I just need to move out of New Jersey. If I move out of New Jersey, I'm going to be fine. It's a lovely thought. I get
Or
where
if the cops would just stop taking me to screening or the ER, I would be fine. If they would just get off my back. It's not me.
Yeah. People, I mean, people at that point do lose hope. And the book really just talks about pre-contemplation as if it's an early stage, but I also like that focus on anti-contemplation, because anti-contemplation really is, I know, I just don't want to deal with it right now. I just can't deal with it right now. You know, that's really what anti-contemplation is. And that's where the hostility comes from. So yeah, the short answer, and I'm not good at short answers, is yes, it's possible. It's rare, but that does happen. And I think that's a consequence of that shaming that people do. When we set ourselves up for failure and change and it doesn't work, there are a few feelings more terrible than failure. However, failure is an opportunity. Or if you remember the movie, failure, the greatest teacher is, a wise little green man once said. Failure can teach us a lot, but the emotions that come along with it can lead us right back into a place where at that point we're willing to say, you know what, I don't even have a problem. You guys are just idiots. You know, I'm moving on. But I think there's, that person's sort of ambivalent. There's part of them that believes that they're protecting themselves, but there's another part of them that doesn't. That's a good question, though.
The most important question of the day was, Ben asked what exit we were. I said 6. I think that's our closest exit off the turnpike, but we're not near the parkway. So
these are very common New Jersey questions.
He also addressed us as being from Jersey. So
no, that's the other part. So
we love Ben.
So the quickest ways to start a fight in New Jersey is it north, south, or north, central, and south? And yes, I realize how ridiculous it is that we divide a small state into smaller pieces, whether it's pork roll or tail or ham, and none of you may have any idea what I was just talking about, or are you a turnpike person, or a Parkway person. That's the other one. That's sort of the east-west divide. So Dawn and I live about 10 minutes apart. So we're both exit sixers, which means we are in the farm part of New Jersey. We are not in the oil refinery, Goodfellas part
Yeah,
of New
and
Jersey.
we're much closer to Philadelphia than we are New York. Probably, I'm about 15 minutes, Ken probably about 25. So
Yep.
that's our metro area.
Yep, that's pretty much how it works. And we have little or nothing in common to do with anybody at the Jersey Shore either. Most of whom weren't from New Jersey, by the way. We're both born and raised. We get very indignant when that happens. So anyway, not that that had anything to do with anything, but there you go. I went to school on Long Island, so that what exit thing I heard every day for about a year. So what we have here is this, it's a dopey little, I call it a cheat sheet. And I made a paper version of this, which we can get handouts for this too. But this is like a nice quick screen about what stage is someone in. So if you're working into the problem, do they acknowledge that they even have a problem? If the answer is no, they're in pre-contemplation. Does the person have a plan for change? They know that they have a problem, but they don't have a plan. If the answer is no, they're in contemplation. Have they started to put that plan into action? If they don't have a plan in action, it is preparation. And then the difference between 6 months for action and maintenance. I'm not so thrilled about that, but when you ask them if they made a change, has that change gotten easier? One other little trick of the trade, and I think I've been good about this so far, I really try not to refer to people as pre-contemplators or contemplators. I try not to make it person specific because it isn't person specific, it's issue specific. You know, I'm in action on some things, I'm in contemplation on other things, and I'm in pre-contemplation about a few things as well. So it's more about the particular issue than the person. All right, so let's roll with this here. So let's test this out and see what you guys know about this whole thing. And you can type this in the chat and you can also discuss it. So Cindy has been in rehab numerous times, but reports this is due to being hassled by her parents and the police. She feels this is my life, I can do what I want, and you wish you could do the same as me. That's why you try to get me to stop. What stage of change does Cindy sound like? And now I'm gonna have to go look at the chat. What do we got?
We have a lot of pre-contemplation, almost
we
have pretty much overwhelmingly pre-contemplation.
All right, they were listening. I can't fool them with this.
So and we do, we have some people slipping in with the new terminology of anti-contemplation too.
Nice.
But I do want to, there is one question by Jackie, and they asked, can a person be in between stages? For instance, in between contemplation and preparation?
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you for saying that. I probably should have said that myself. You can be kind of 1 foot in each, like people transition from one into the other. And as we mentioned, it's a messy transition. Yeah, you can definitely have 1 foot in each world for sure. All right, now let's take this one on. That last one was too easy for you guys. I'm embarrassed. I should have started with a tougher one. So Brian presents with multiple issues. He's in treatment for bipolar disorder, has been taking medication for this for 4 months. He also wants to get help for his alcohol abuse, but states that nothing works. He also reports that he smokes pot daily to get to sleep and doesn't see this as a problem. Okay, Brian is complicated. Brian also sounds a lot more like our clients, right? Not so clear cut and has a few things going on. So how we're going to come at Brian is, we're going to divide him up by issue because Brian is not a stage of change. He has a bunch of things going on and he's in a stage of change for each of them. So let's start out with the first one, bipolar disorder. So if he's in treatment for bipolar disorder, presumably voluntarily, and he's been taking medication for this for 4 months, what stage does that sound like?
Seeing a lot of action, I saw one maintenance, but a lot of action, couple maintenance responses.
Yeah,
But
I would not, yeah. I mean, from the textbook, he's action. We could probably find out if he's in action or maintenance with one question, and that just is, how are things going with the medication? And if things are cool and he's rolling with it and everything's good, he probably qualifies for maintenance. If it's still kind of a day-to-day struggle, you know, I'm still getting used to it, this, that, and the other, it's probably action. So both good answers there. All right, so let's go to the next one. He also wants to get help for his alcohol abuse, but states that nothing works. So that tells us a couple things about Brian. It tells us that he has acknowledged that it is a problem. He wants to get help for it, but it sounds like he's also been through that loop a couple of times. And he sounds like he's kind of in a place of despair about it. So what does that sound like regarding Brian's alcohol use? Where would that be?
So I'm seeing actually more variety in this one. I'm seeing contemplation, preparation,
Hmm.
a little pre-contemplation, but overwhelmingly contemplation. I see action / preparation.
Hmm.
So a little bit more, squishy with this one.
Yeah, a little squishy with this one. Yeah, because it sounds like he's been in movement. There's been movement here, as was mentioned before.
Yeah, like Ben said, he has tried. So, that may put him a little further along.
Or Brian in the past may have been in preparation, action, may have even been in maintenance in the past. But now,
Monica pointed out, I think very astutely, that it may be contemplation because of the use of the but statement. Or at the very least, like it's drawing our attention to that.
yeah, I'm a big fan of that. That's where I would start from. And just like with the bipolar disorder, and I hope you're getting this, as you're reading this, questions are coming to your mind because these vignettes are deliberately very sparse. So you got all these questions in your head, like, okay, what has he tried before? Where is he at now? Is he trying anything now? So all these questions should be going to help kind of zoom you in on where Brian is. Because is he in a place where he says nothing works, so I'm not going to try anything? Or is it nothing works that I've seen so far and I'm still looking for help? Like he wants to get help, so that desire is still there. So it probably textbook would be contemplation, but again, he's negotiable as well. And these aren't meant to be clear cut and discrete. These are these different phases that people move through. So he also reports that he smokes pot daily to get to sleep and doesn't see this as a problem. Where do we sound? Where are we at here regarding Brian?
I have additional questions for that potential issue.
This one's gotten more complicated.
Assumed issue.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. So I just saw, like Ben wrote, I don't know if we know that pot is a problem, right? So I think that this is getting more and more complicated let me refrain. As more and more people are utilizing this for medicinal purposes legally prescribed, and it's recreationally legal in states like Washington and New Jersey and so forth. But I'm going to take the step back and let the professional explain.
No. I've been doing some version of this slide presentation for years, and it's interesting how the answers change, right? Same vignette. So the best definition of addiction that I ever heard is it hurts you and you keep doing it, right? It hurts you, and I would maybe extend it to, or the people around you, but you keep doing it. So have we established that this is doing him harm? I don't know if we have. We might need some more questions. If he's using this and it helps him sleep, and again, if he's got bipolar disorder, sleep may very well be an issue for him. He might prefer to address that with pot than with anything else. So it's up in the air. So I would see, where is the harm? Now, where this becomes a moot point is, if we were going to work with Brian. So let's take a look at him now. So we got Brian, we got 3 different things. We've got bipolar disorder somewhere in action to maintenance. We've got alcohol abuse, and he's somewhere in contemplation-ish. And then we've got this pot thing, which he does not see as a problem. So let's go with that. If we're going to come at Brian, if we're going to use the stages of change, we're going to start with the issue that he's most ready to move on. Theoretically, the one he's furthest along in the change process. So if I'm working with Brian and I'm coming at it from a stage of change approach, what I'm going to do is the first question is one that came up before. So how are things going with the medication? It doesn't say here whether he's happy with it, whether it's working for him, whether he's miserable. Because he's the furthest along in this, that's where I would start. even if it's just to say, oh, I'm taking the medication, it's a godsend, it's kept me out of jail, it's kept me out of the hospital, it's really working well for me. Great. Moving on. Then we'll move to the next thing. That's covered. If there's something with medication that needs to be adjusted or tweaked, okay, then let's go there. Maybe we're still in action and there's still some changes to be made. So that would be where I would go first. The second place I would go is this alcohol thing. He wants to get help for it. So stage of change, I want to meet him where he is. I want to help him address the things, because this is something that we get caught up in. And you tell me whether it makes sense where you work. Dawn and I see this in the hospital all the time. So the client will come in and say, here are the 3 things I want to work on. I want a place to live. I want to get my job back. And I got to straighten out all my legal situation. And then the treatment team will say back to him, okay, well, you need to take medication, go on Social Security, disability, and we need to find you, a place to live, which might be a group home. Do you hear that those 2 halves of the bridge didn't come down next to each other? There's still a huge gap in between. And if the person wants this and the team says you need this, and there's no effort to connect in the middle, now it's going to be a fight all the way. So what this is doing is listening to the client and what their clients' wants and needs are. Not that the client's wants and needs completely dictate how treatment is going to go going forward, but that voice has to be at the table. It's got to be, to me, it's half the structure. So I want to come at, okay, Brian, what are your priorities? Here's where you're taking action. Let's see if we can help you and support you there. The next place is someplace that you want to get help, but you're not doing anything for it. And you know what? While we're doing that work around the alcohol use, we're probably talking about some of the pot stuff too, whether we mention it specifically or not. And maybe it is a problem and maybe it isn't a problem. We don't know. We'll know when we get there. But we got plenty to do with Brian before we get there. Does that make sense?
Can we have one question from Linda?
Shoot.
What about someone with mental health disorders that has tried recovery in inpatient and outpatient settings at least 6 times and is still struggling with addiction? Now they're considering an inpatient mental health program focusing on severe trauma, PTSD, and anxiety, which seems to be the main issues with coping. I'm guessing it's like at the core of probably the behavioral health and addictive behaviors. Would you suggest that as a good plan?
Absolutely.
That might be effective.
Absolutely. Again, referring to the other videos, we've got one on addiction and one on process addiction. The role of trauma, which helps create all of the psychiatric symptoms, which then creates the discomfort that person is seeking to medicate through an addiction. I've worked with very few, if any, people with addictions who did not have some sort of interesting trauma background. And I'll go right back to the Patrick Carnes stuff again. If you guys are interested in that, if you're familiar with that, I'm a huge fan. The Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps is a 12-step guide, and it's non-addiction specific. It begins to address trauma. It's not the same as, going to a therapist and dealing with that, but you really got to look at where this stuff comes from. And I don't think it's quite as clean as, okay, it's biological, they're 3rd generation, person with an alcohol problem. So I would definitely go that direction. If there's something that's definitely fueling the fire of the discomfort that person feels like they need to medicate away. So I think that's exactly where to go.
We have another question, Ken, from Ivy. I sort of answered it in the chat, but I was hoping you could elaborate on it better. The question was, can motivational interviewing techniques be useful for PTSD, trauma symptoms in an absence of addiction, but solely, in regards to treatment of the mental health diagnosis? I answered yes, but that's only for my own literal personal experience from trauma recovery, but I'm hoping you can answer better.
No, well, I'm going to give the same short answer. I'm a big fan of motivational interviewing because it isn't dictating to the person what to do. I don't think that anyone who is dealing with trauma issues wants to feel like they're being trapped or controlled. So in motivational interviewing, they are really in charge of where the flow of conversation goes, as you'll see when we get further into it. And that way they are in control of it. And it's not the game of one-on-one that therapy usually is, or even things that are more therapist driven. So yeah, I would definitely say that. That way, the person has say over what they have control over that therapeutic process. I just think that's really important. They don't need somebody else coming in to be in control of them at that point because they've already had a negative experience with that. I mean, we struggle with that, right? People who have had difficulty with authority figures so far down the line don't want a new authority figure in their life. They should probably learn how to be their own authority figure a little more effectively. So let me cut back just for a second. So I forgot to do this with the first slide because I was eager to get to Brian because I know that's a big discussion piece. So what do we do with Cindy? What's the plan with Cindy? What do we do with someone who is who is in pre-contemplation regarding their addiction? I'm sure you've heard this from somebody in different words before. So what's the plan? Because here, we're not necessarily working on a change plan. And I know the answer to some of this is going to vary depending on where you work and what your role is going to be with Cindy. But just to look at it from, in terms of the stages, if someone is in pre-contemplation, I want to get the backstory. I want Cindy's backstory. Where did she get the idea that this is my life, I can do whatever I want, and that other people wish they could be like her, and that this is the life that she wants to live, or if she feels like this is the best life she can live. I want to see how she got here. I'm not contesting it. I'm not arguing with her about it. I'm not even saying that she's wrong. I just want to know how she got here. And to a certain degree, how is that working for her? And are there places and times where that isn't working for her? Chances are, and at some level, she's decided to go to rehab before. Was that voluntary? Was she made to go? Is there a part of her that really doesn't believe all of this? So that's part one. Get the cover story and hear their story out. And then the second part of it is limit setting. So are there limits involved? Like, okay, you can use or drink all you want, but I need you to be clean and sober while you're here, or, whatever rules there are, where you are. So it's that combination of get the story and then the limit setting. Look, this is my role. This is what, my role is going to be while we're working here.
There's a lot of great comments coming in addition to some sample lines of questioning that people would suggest. So like Charisse said, obviously first develop rapport. So, like you said, getting the story, like what's her story, right? We know what everybody wants for her. What's her story? What does she want? I think you mentioned it, Ken, with making sure that, okay, you're not ready to stop now, but I need you to be sober when you're in this session. So starting from a harm reduction point, perspective, utilizing at least you're going to be sober during our sessions. And then some questioning, like if doing what you want is getting you what you want, and how's it working out for you? Deidre had suggested work on a plan to help her stop coming in contact with the police, right? If the police are the problem, how do we keep you from drawing their attention?
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of great insight.
Yeah, great stuff on there. When I took a quick look and I saw find out how that's working for her. Great question. I love the question. How's that working for you? I also saw the question, where, if anywhere, is this not working for you? Great question. Where's the dissonance? A lot more of that coming up in motivational interviewing. And then I saw another one about your future. So, okay, so 10 years, Cindy, from now, if you're right where you are now doing what you're doing, that's good. That's good for you. And again, that's an MI thing where I'm making it sound like I'm almost in favor of that instead of saying, you don't want to be doing this in 10 years, do you? So
there's a couple
come at it neutrally where, okay, so in 10 years, if you're right at where you are right now, that's good for you.
Right.
Not weighing in. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dawn.
No. I'm just reading a couple others. If no one was hassling you, this was from Odessa, no one was hassling you now, where would you want to be? Right. Meeting her where she's at, And another one from Kirsten. Do you feel that you're able to meet all your current needs in life? And what, if anything, would you change?
Sure. Sure. There's nothing wrong with asking, like, okay, I can think of where I would want Cindy's life to be different. Where does Cindy see that she would want her life to be different? That's the question that really matters. We can all sit around and talk about all Cindy's problems, but at the end of the day, the opinion that primarily matters is hers. You also brought up a great point. I mentioned to you before about the gentleman who felt he was a member of the English royal family. Now, no medication touches this. This guy was in a hospital being medicated for, I believe, 8 years. And that never went away. That never budged. So he got out of the hospital. He was back in again in a month. And one of the things we started doing was saying, look, man, this English royal family thing, I'm not saying you are, I'm not saying you're not. But if you tell the police this, if you tell these people this stuff, you're going to end up back in here again. So I think Bill Miller was the one who said that the people you work with might not agree with you that they have a psychiatric problem or that they have an addiction problem. But in our case, they can all agree that they have a hospital problem, or they may have a police problem, or they may have a homelessness problem. So how do we address that problem? So this man may believe he's a member of the English royal family until his dying day. That may not go anywhere. And at a certain level, it's less our job to disperse him of that than it is to get him to be out of the hospital and functional in the community and doing what he wants to do, whatever that looks like, going forward. So that's kind of really where that is. And that's a shift. When you work with people that come from kind of old school, maybe even sometimes medicine or nursing, they're coming like, well, wait a minute, we need to arrest these symptoms. This person can't recover until these symptoms are arrested. Well, sometimes those symptoms don't get arrested. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just a matter of how do you, I'm sure many of us we're all operating with medical problems that we are managing while we're living our life. Those things aren't gone. They're not going anywhere. But because of the treatment and because of our participation in our treatment, we can still move forward. And that's what we want for people like Cindy or like this other person I was just talking about.
Nigel suggested high tea with him. High tea with a member of the royal family. And I just wanted to make a comment. I see Odessa also said, who knows? Maybe he was told this as a child. Now with the new DNA research that you can do and all that, I will tell you that my son loves to remind me that he is a descendant of William the Conqueror, the first king of England. And I said, you still have to do your homework. Mom doesn't care. Mom doesn't have royalty in her lineage. I came from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe. That's it. So you still have to do your homework.
That's great. No, that's, you know what? That's absolutely true in that and I would rather do an approach like high tea than do the same thing that the last 20 people who saw this guy did before I got there. I would rather try something different. And you know what? You're right. Very often, first of all, everyone's symptoms make sense when looked through the proper lens, right? So even something that's psychotic, there's a symbolic meaning or something in there. There is some significance. It means something to him. And if I hang around long enough and have these discussions with him about it, maybe I can find out what that is. But if I just shut it down and say, look, man, that's just being psychotic, man. Let's just focus on, taking your medication and all that other kind of stuff, then we're not going to get anywhere. So you make a really good point, and that those things really do mean something. And people aren't going to change until their fear of the unknown is less than the discomfort of staying the same. There's that little threshold, we'll talk about this more in MI, but that fear of the unknown is significant. And so people aren't going to make that change until they are either so sick and tired of where they are, or they just overcome that fear of, what, wherever the next step is has got to be better than this. And then I think I saw a hand. Sam, did I see your hand go up? Thought I saw a hand go up there.
It was a mistake. Sam said it was a mistake.
It's all good. It was a butt dial, the Zoom equivalent of a butt dial. So I wanted to go over, so of course, next week, the next 2 weeks, we're doing kind of the follow-up to this, MI part 1 and part 2. You don't really need to catch those if you've caught this, but that leads into that nicely. But those two really make sense together. If you can make one, make the other. And I just wanted to forward to these things. So this is the information for that Changing for Good book. The authors are Prochaska, Norcross, and DiClemente. It's a fantastic book. It's a paperback, so it should be found pretty cheap. If you get really lucky, Barnes & Noble used to sell Motivational Interviewing and Changing for Good as a package deal, so that ended up working out pretty well. And also the website on the bottom there, that site's rutgers.edu. This is where all of our other stuff is. We have, interestingly enough, we have several videos on Stages of Change, an earlier version of this talk, and we also have several things on motivational interviewing. So if you can't make the MI ones, they're there, or if you want to catch this some other time, this video will be up somewhere, but there'll also be those other versions. They're quicker because they don't have the audience interaction, so they're like 20 to 30 minutes. There's also a few other ones on trauma and on addictions, as we mentioned before, regular, and then also a specific one on the process addictions / dependencies. So you can access that stuff as well. Go into a little more detail about what we talked about today.
Okay, so it's my turn to jump in here and read some more housekeeping stuff. So we want to, and I don't think we're quite at our end time, so we'll stay back for any questions. If you have specific questions for Ken, please feel free to stay back. I know he'd be more than willing to answer. So we want to thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time, attention, and participation. Today's webinar was hosted by DBHR through the Healthcare Authority. We'd like to remind you that the slides, a link to the recording of this session, and other resources will be available in the follow-up email, which will come from Washington. So check your inbox for that. Don't forget to check out Washington's Foundational Community Supports newsletter for all things FCS and upcoming training events. And the number is on the screen if your organization would like to become an FCS provider. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up, but Ken and I will stay behind until the top of the hour. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving and are enjoying your holiday season.
Okay,
A couple people asked about certificates or CEUs. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we're not offering CEs or certificates for these webinars, but I will say there are several trainings, or a lot of trainings, I believe, webinars that you can watch on our website, which are associated with a post-test. And if you complete the post-test, which is not, maybe limited to 10 or less questions, you will receive at least a certificate saying that you viewed that training. So those certificates can sometimes be converted into credits. If your licensing or certification board will accept some of those generic certificates. They will be from a university, so sometimes that holds a little bit more clout. So just to say that there are some opportunities for you to potentially convert some of that into credits.
I saw a couple questions that we didn't get to. Kate, I hope you're still here because I saw a few questions of yours in the Q&A. She asked a couple questions. Will progress in one area affect progress in another area? And the answer is yes. And usually how that works is when a person makes progress in one area, they gain some momentum. So that's one of the logical reasons about putting one change off and focusing on one. Let's just get some momentum and some progress going. I gave you the example before about cleaning my house one room at a time. When I get that one room clean, immediately the rest of the house starts to look worse. So that compels me to move to the next room. And also I feel positive because it's partially done. I can stop there if I want to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ken. Complete your thought. I'm sorry.
I was just going to go on to the other question, and it's a great question. It's probably more of a door opener than a closer. And that is, what's my opinion of daily marijuana use on recovery? And we could have a good old time about that one.
One of the things that I wanted to mention was that idea of behavioral activation as well. sometimes progress on one thing that was, I don't want to say easy to achieve, but was more easily achievable than another thing may motivate us to then take action in other areas because we've had a win.
Mhm. Yeah, the recovery community is kind of split. It's always been split about abstinence. It's always been split about, there are a lot of differences in that. The old school thing is, if you're smoking weed, you're not necessarily in recovery. I'm not necessarily a big fan of that. Going back to the Carn stuff again, there's something called the three circles. And the three circles, if you think of the Target logo, there's the inner circle, which is the stuff that always gets you in trouble. There's the middle circle that is the sort of danger zone, but not quite that behavior yet. And then there's the outer circle, which are healthy behaviors. So just like we were talking about with Brian, if Brian is smoking weed and he's getting to sleep and that's the end of the story, then maybe that's a win for Brian. If he's spending money he doesn't have, if he's in a place where it's still illegal and he's getting nailed for it, if it's aggravating other symptoms, then we may have a problem. But I think Dawn's absolutely right. When most of the people that we're working with have a list of things that they're working on, and if we start with the things they're ready to move on and start making some progress, Brian may find that weed is something he doesn't want in his life, or it may be combating the lesser evil of him not getting sleep at night. So it's really a case by case thing. So I'm a big fan of the three circles approach. And again, the three circles they're done and filled out by the client. This is in the Patrick Carnes stuff too. And it's in our addictions videos, so that people can weigh for themselves what is doing good and what's doing harm for me in my life. Because probably marijuana, more than any other substance, there's been a lot of debate back and forth about, and conflicting information. To my knowledge, it's still considered a Schedule I drug, despite being approved medicinally in most of the country.
Yeah, I don't think that's changed. It's just been federally decriminalized, so that you can't be prosecuted. Merrily stated that they've worked with individuals who won't go to 12-step programs because of the continued stigma around marijuana use.
Sure.
And I'm assuming that means, like, for people who continue to use it as part of their daily,
Sure.
routine.
Absolutely. So, and the philosophy on addictions recovery, I'll say the other problem about marijuana being Schedule I is you can't do research on it. All of the good marijuana research is coming from other countries. So that really, again, I don't care if you smoke or not, and I haven't in over 20 years, but the only data, and I had to look at Kate's question again, I do have concerns about people smoking who have psychotic symptoms. And I also have concerns about people smoking below a certain age where their brains are still developing. But those are special situations.
And I think, as someone who is an advocate, it can be a depressant as well. And so for people who are struggling with depression, that finding that happy place with it, so to speak, can be a challenge.
Right. And part of a big part, and it isn't really an engraved part of stages of changes, it's individualized. It's not a one size fits all. You don't come in and say, okay, well, everybody does this or nobody does this. It doesn't work. With stages of change, you see where the person is, and then their priorities really kind of set the tone for where the work is going forward, so that we're not spending all sorts of time trying to talk somebody out of something that they're not going to be talked out of, or trying to talk them into something that they're not going to be talked into. That's a waste of everybody's time. And it wastes valuable time that you could be forming a relationship with that person, which is really the crucible where all change comes from in the first place. And I'm looking for other questions that I missed. The chat was impossible to keep up with. There were too many people. I couldn't even keep up with it.
We had 325 people at the high point, Ken. That's our largest ever.
Wow.
We're
going on tour next year, Dawn.
Yeah, I hope we can actually get to Washington.
Get
Actually,
some.
I will be
Wait, you might
going.
actually be going. You might actually
I
be going.
will be going next year.
That's
Kelminda noted that many folks with schizophrenia, such as her friends, family, and clients, use weed in the same, or use weed with the same cost benefit analysis, i.e., yes, this will make my hallucinations worse, but I'm so stressed, I'd rather take more hallucinations over the anxiety.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I think exactly what you were saying, Ken, is we know all the ways it could be harmful,
yep.
but we also have to listen to what the cons are as the person sees it if they were to quit. You know, which one is more stressful, the hallucinations or the anxiety?
And the more normalized weed becomes, I mean, it's been some semblance of normal since Woodstock, but never more like people that are in their 20s now, you know, and think about the people that are going to grow up with it being decriminalized or, you know, legal in their state from the time that, as long as they've known. It's only going to be more normalized. So we can't just give a blanket statement like it's bad for you. We really have to look at where it is for a person. I have a client I'm working with now, a young man in his 20s, and he can smoke regularly quite a bit without having any adverse reactions. And then all of a sudden, I don't know if it's an amount or whatever it is, now he's like out of commission for 3 days. So it's yeah, again, it's not a real black or white issue. And if I put myself in a position where I say, look, you can't do this anymore, you know, that's not going to happen. It's not going to work that way. So I guess it's the responsible use over just, you know, stopping it. But again, it has to see, is this getting in the way? If by doing that, that gets in the way of his other goals, like school and work and his family relationships, then he's got a decision to make about it. And it's my job to support him in that decision. Yeah, yeah. To Odessa's point, that's the hard part about people being exposed to it so young. Your brain is developing until 25 or 26. By then, most of us have made our decisions about what role marijuana is going to play in our lives. And usually at half that age is when we've had our first contact with it, if not sooner. So that's a problem, because then you're talking brain development, and that's a whole other issue. Yep, scares me to death. And this ain't the kind of weed that I grew up on, the old 6 to 8%. It's a different ball game now. I'm afraid of it. Truth, I would love to tell you.
80%,
I would
80%,
I would
80% now, Ken.
I would love to tell you that I have some noble reason for not getting back into it. I'm scared. Scared. The idea of alcohol being a greater threat than THC, that's a very legitimate point, and you got data that backs you up. What did they say? When you drive drunk, you'll drive through a stop sign. When you're high, you'll stop at it and wait for it to turn green.
And I think that's something that everybody, you know, law enforcement is struggling with right now too, right? How do you um, keep the roads safe? Because
I was out in Seattle a few years ago, and we were taking a cab, and there's a row of cabs, a row of cabbies, and a row of completely red eyes, completely legal. And I go, okay, do I feel okay getting in a car with somebody who's obviously baked? You know, if they were sitting there with a bottle of Jack Daniels, it'd be a no brainer. But so it's complicated.
well, I want to thank everybody. And since we only have about a minute left, I really appreciate all the people who stayed on. We have over 100 people still here. So I want to thank you, and thank you for the lively conversation and all of your insight and experience. It really brought a lot to this webinar. So thank you. And so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Just a reminder, you will be getting an email within the next 24 hours from Washington Healthcare Authority with a link to the recording and the PowerPoint in PDF format for you. And so we thank you and hope to see you all next month, or later this month. I'm sorry, it is December now.
Next week.
Take care all.
Take it easy.